Hello, my name's Robert Dean Steele, and I'm talking to you today about redemptive stories. Now, I happen to have a redemptive story in my family. When I first came to know the Lord, I went to Bible college and I started working in a church called Highway Christian Center. And during those years, we had some fabulous young adults. There was Keith Burgess. There was, of course, my brother in law, who became my brother in law, Dave Bigsby, and others as well. Now, Dave, of course, was a very talented musician and also an intellectual individual. And when he first started off and he was in my youth group and my young adults group. And so he fell in love with my sister-in-law, whose name was Val. And they got married not long after my wife and I had gotten married. And Dave, of course, loved the Lord. I remember when we were in the community of Lacombe, he came down with some friends of his and they did a wonderful outreach in our church. It was just absolutely fabulous. But then over time, some things happened to Dave. And Dave basically walked away from the Lord. And it became very uncomfortable because, of course, me being the way that I am, I always wanted Dave to come back. And we would have these discussions, and Dave would say to me, well, I know what you're saying, but Dave would often, and our family gatherings would often be uncomfortable only because Dave was unsaved at the time and had walked away from the things of God. And it wasn't until we actually moved to the community of St. Albert, where we currently reside. Some things changed Dave's life. And what was the thing that changed Dave's life? Well, he got a notification that he had cancer. And Dave, after being away from the Lord for 30 years, did some introspection. He began to look at eternity in a totally different manner. And Dave, he responded right because when he heard about the cancer, he came back to the Lord. And as soon as he came back to the Lord, the Dave that we knew before all of a sudden emerged. God was changing his heart and changing his situation. And God began to use this particular disease. And folks, it depends on how we react to the situations that we find ourselves in. Dave went through the cancer treatments and different things along that lines. He came back to the Lord and he worked. Now, this was the interesting part. I didn't see the wisdom in it. I didn't see what God was doing. God had spoken to Dave's heart to stay in the same company where he had been involved in for many, many years as an electrician and then as a supervisor in the company. And he felt that he needed to keep working, even though there were many days where Dave didn't feel like going to work, but there was an internal drive in him. Now, I recognized it now as the moving of the Holy Spirit, because at the time, I didn't see what was going on in Dave's heart. I thought, Dave, well, why don't you just take it easy and spend time with your wife? I mean, this is a very debilitating situation. Well, Dave managed to live for another 2.5 years with the cancer. It went in remission for a while and then it came back, and it really was quite devastating to his body. But it didn't stop what God was doing in his life, how God was changing him, how that God was changing his wife, Valerie, my sister-in-law, and his life actually became a testimony to those around us. Well, Dave passed away a couple of days before Christmas a few years ago. And we had gone to visit him that night. And he said, I'll see you in the morning. We had a wonderful time of fellowship. We, prayed together. And then a couple hours later, Dave went home to be the Lord. And so I had the privilege of being able to do his funeral. Now, this is where it really gets cool. We had said that we were going to hold it in such and such a place. And we had anticipated that we were going to have a certain number. That's not what happened. When we got there, we had to use the overflow in that particular facility. That facility sat 300 people, and we had to use the overflow. And many of the people that came to the funeral were actually from Dave's work. And it was right then and there, as I was standing there getting ready to do the service, that I realized the reason why Dave felt so strongly about staying where he was. God saw that moment that I was going to have the privilege of not only sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and having members of his family and our family doing, different things in the service, but there were a couple of hundred people there that had seen Dave's testimony. They had seen the radical change in his life. And they came there to honor him, to celebrate, and to remember the legacy of the last 2.5 years of his life. I had the privilege of sharing the gospel with those people. I've never seen most of them since that day, but I do know that it had an impact on the people that were there. So I want to share this story with you because you may have a member of your family, like my brother-in-law Dave, who basically had walked away from the things of God. And we had prayed for him. I prayed for him every single day. I would include him in my household prayers. And all of a sudden, to have the privilege of being able to see him come back to the Lord, to have the privilege of being able to share at his service, and to see those people impacted and to hear the testimonies, because afterwards people came to me and said, I really appreciated it. And then they would share the stories of how Dave impacted their lives. I want to tell you something. You never know what God's going to do. So don't give up. Keep praying. Because remember, we've got a promise of Acts 16:31 that says, not only shall we be saved, but our household as well, but also as well. Proverbs 22:6, train a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. We had been praying for this guy for a long time. God moved in his heart. And I was grateful that the end was a victory. Thank you for spending time with me. God bless you. And I hope that this particular story has inspired you.